Starring times. So IMCS Asia Pacific has dedicated the month of August to celebrating the indigenous community and their culture. And as we come to the end of this celebration, this is the third webinar we are hosting, and I would like to welcome all of you to it. Yeah. So this webinar is hosted by the IMCS Asia Pacific Indigenous Youth Commission, and it is co-organized by the Asia Indigenous Youth Platform as well as the Bangladesh Indigenous Youth Forum. So I would like to invite Mr. Toni Mathew Chiran to deliver the welcome address on behalf of IMCS, BAIYF, and BAIYP. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, moderator. And the respected chair, panelists, and all the participants. Very good afternoon, everyone. And I hope you all are doing well in this COVID-19 pandemic situation. And on behalf of Asia Indigenous Youth Platform, BAIYP, and Bangladesh Indigenous Movement of Catholic Students, PEX Romana, IMCS, and Bangladesh Indigenous Youth Forum, I'd like to welcome all of you in this important online webinar. And on the occasion of International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples, we are discussing these important webinar sessions, selected thematic issues, celebrating Indigenous culture and advocating Indigenous people's rights in the digital era. We have some objectives, of course, to arrange such this important session. I believe this important session will inspire the indigenous youths to be engaged in the indigenous movement-based indigenous movements and bring together us and share the knowledge to advocate for our rights-based movement in the digital era. And I hope the meeting will give us a fruitful outcome, and of course, to make a united platform in the regional or global level. So, and you will enjoy the discussion session, I hope. And thanks once again, and best wishes for all of you, their panelists and their participants. And I wish you best of luck. So thank you, and thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chiran. So we are hosting this webinar, and the theme for this webinar is celebrating Indigenous culture and advocating Indigenous people's right in the digital era. We have with us 4 speakers from countries across Asia who would be sharing their expertise with us, their experiences, their expertise, and their ways in which they have led the national movements and their own movements in advocating for the indigenous rights. I invite Mr. Wilfrex A, the president of Ateneo Lumad Students Organization, Philippines, to share his insights on the theme. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Wilfrex.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes. You may go ahead.
Okay. So I'll now start my sharing for this afternoon, this evening. I am, by the way, Wilfrex A, Talabon, and I am a member of the indigenous community representing the indigenous youths in Davao City, Philippines. And I didn't expect to be speaking in front of you this evening, to be honest. When I was told that I would be sharing my thoughts this evening, it turned out to be a true surprise. But I accepted the offer because I felt in my heart that this would be a solid resource for me to demonstrate my identity and learnings as a student leader and as an IT youth. My purpose is to share my thoughts as a Southeast Asian indigenous youth immersed in indigenous activities as a student leader and celebrating our culture through digital platforms. But first, I'd like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to become an indigenous people. And I see no reason why I shouldn't contribute to this historic event. I hope you get a lot out of what I'm about to say this evening. In reality, my identity served me well in both social and intellectual contexts. I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for my identity. I simply wanted to let you know that because of this identity, I became a scholar. And this instilled in me a strong desire to contribute to uplifting, enriching, and preserving our cultural legacy, which was passed down to us by our predecessors with all their strength and hard work in the context of societal, economic, and cultural crisis in their time. I'd want to say definitively that many of our indigenous peoples and youths' difficulties and problems are increasingly explicit right now. Whether we want it or not, many IT youths are losing in touch with their roots. Some of them seem to have no grasp of their tribe's history or how to communicate in their own dialects, which is a vital embodiment of our cultural grounds. But I cannot blame them. Why? Last Sunday's webinar, our speakers stressed the need of providing avenues for youth to overcome the social and economic issues they currently face. Many indigenous people youths all across the world are now being given a limited number of opportunities and venues to showcase their abilities as competitive global individuals. And we discussed the injustices we witnessed with our indigenous people student leaders from all across Asia during our sessions in the International Movement of Catholic Students Asia Pacific led workshops last month. And we exchanged narratives and came to the realization that we are still living at the margins of our own countries. And one of the issues raised there was social discrimination. Along with several of our indigenous student leaders disclosing that some of the non-indigenous peoples treat them unfairly by calling them animal names. Their skin tone has also been humiliated and discriminated against in terms of how they dress, how they talk, and how they behave. And it's for this reason that in order for some of our fellow indigenous peoples to be treated fairly, they sought to conform themselves to, to the culture of the new generation and the system of the new generation. And parents may observe how injustices occur in their age, which is why they would teach their children in a different way so that they do not have to go through the same experiences that they underwent. It is not our fault that we were not informed about our culture and customs, but it is wrong to choose or decide not to look back to our origins and to not even try to understand its significance in one's own life, and to be a catalyst for change for our own communities. In the online realm, the generation gap problem and the slowly withering of IT culture exist, whether we like it or not. So how do we deal with this problem? Nonetheless, as an IT youth living in the digital era, I can attest to the fact that it is really problematic. There are many opportunities in the world that may lead us away from our true identity. And it is, however, still a question of decision. And I'm pleased to say that I personally did my role by choosing to live in harmony with my fellow indigenous people groups, preserving and enriching the identity inscribed on our hearts. And to this day, I am constantly learning how to be the ideal catalyst for change for my tribe and and the entire indigenous community. But as I have stated just a while ago, it requires time and process and involvement. It requires time and process and involvement with uh, involvement in cultural events was one of the things that helped me develop my cultural spirit. I've been actively participating actively participating and engaging in activities within my tribe on our tribal day, as well as other relevant events and engagements in our region since I was in primary school. And participating in some traditional activities and doing our own tribal dance was a wonderful experience indeed. That was the stepping stone for me to appreciate my culture and be delighted by how our predecessors choreographed all the tribes, customs, and beliefs that we are living up to now. And as a result, it became easy for me to participate in larger venues and interact with other indigenous peoples from various cultures. This is why having tribal events in our own communities is very important because it brings us closer to our origins, it unlocks our potential, it motivates us to grow as a person, and it also makes us proud of our ancestry as a member of the indigenous peoples. But the problem is that the pandemic has struck, and we all know that. And as a result of the uproar, our tribal activities and festivals have been significantly affected. And the young indigenous people's enthusiasm for embracing and upholding their culture is slowly waning. Now that everything has gone digital, now is the chance for us as student leaders to show how resilient we are and how capable we are of fulfilling our predecessors' aspirations. We could still celebrate our identities in a variety of ways in the digital world. And I'd want to share with you how our local organization, which is the Ateneo Lumad Students Organization, of which I am the current president, has grown and succeeded in fulfilling our vision, our mission, and our goals, notwithstanding the pandemic. We made the most out of the digital platform to realize our projects. And yes, we've done a lot of events like community outreach programs, online cultural showcases, different partnerships with other external organizations, online dialogues, and even engagements like this, all of which benefited greatly not only us, but also the people outside our school of interest. And we instilled pride in our tribal communities and had a positive influence on people's lives, especially the younger generation. So one thing that I've learned is that indigenous youth have the potential. We have also the ability to be agents of change. But it was just concealed because we weren't given enough opportunities to let that one out and show forth our capabilities as indigenous youths, as indigenous peoples. And I consider myself fortunate that movements like this exist on a global scale, allowing us to express ourselves and share our experiences with other indigenous peoples from various cultures. Diversity isn't really a challenge, but ignorance is, according to the preceding workshops and webinars that we had last month. And I'm grateful that my eyes were opened and my perceptions broadened throughout those times. It was such an honor to be identified as an indigenous people. To my indigenous people colleagues listening to me out there, and even to the non-ITs, be yourself, regardless of gender, religion, economic status, the ethnicity, or the circumstance. I believe that we can do more, whether it's pandemic or not, and whether we're in the digital era or not. Learning, unlearning, and relearning our roots is really a matter of choice. Good evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilfrex, for sharing with us your insights and stressing the need to take pride in the Indigenous culture and to look back on the roots of our origins and of the Indigenous community that most of us belong to. Thank you for that, Mr. Wilfrex. Now we move on to the next speaker. We have with us Ms. Binita Tamang from IMCS Asia Pacific, and she's also a member of the IMCS Indigenous Peoples Youth Commission. I invite Ms. Binita to share her insights and ideas on the topic. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Binita.
Thank you, Abhijit. Can I have my, okay. So, Lasa Shafula and Namaste to everyone. I'll be sharing with you with the theme, the need to engage in regional and global platforms as a way of expanding perspectives and interact with other indigenous communities. So let's begin with some basic information as culture. Culture as for all the indigenous people, culture our culture is our identity, where culture depicts our tradition, our language, our clothing, the knowledge and the wisdom that we have from our ancestors. And we are also very close to our nature. So So the close attachment with the natural phenomenon that also identifies us as indigenous community. Next slide. Okay. As indigenous community, we have been facing many barriers and challenges to uplift our life and to get to the access to our rights. So some of the challenges that indigenous people faces are illiteracy, marginalization, stereotypical mindsets, lack of attachment with outer digital world, indifference by the system, and lack of ship. And moving forward, the main theme of the presentation is why do we need the regional and global platforms for advocacy? So as we all know that the major problem of the indigenous people are deep-rooted, and they need to be heard to the society, they need to be heard in the regional and global platform. So even if they are heard, even if the voice of the indigenous people are heard, they have been suppressed by the dominant community of the society. So this has been an important issue of indigenous people to 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 bring in the regional or the global platform so that they can get access to their rights and to assess the challenges that they have been facing since the past. So reaching out to the global platforms or the regional platforms, we it reaching out to such platforms like IMCS or IPP or IPYC, it empowers indigenous people to raise their voice and to raise the voice against inequality. And it also educates them the actual need and the problems of indigenous people and engage them in solving those problems. And similarly, these platforms also help them to advocate for their own rights and to work in solidarity with each other, including non-indigenous people's forums. So this ultimately helps in the preservation and promotion of indigenous values and culture. So the global platforms such as United Nations, IMCS, IP, AIPP, IPYC, and other regional organizations in the respective countries are working consistently for an indigenous people. Next slide. And as a result, this time, indigenous peoples are specifically mentioned in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Goal. Can we have next slide? Okay, so this time indigenous peoples are specifically mentioned in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Goal. This is as a result of indigenous people's strong engagement in the process towards the 2030 Agenda. The final resolution transforming our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, refers to indigenous peoples 6 times, 3 times in the political declaration, 2 in the targets under goal number 2 on zero hunger, and goal number 4 on education. So moving forward, to get into the platforms, or after getting into the platforms, it is very important to interact with other indigenous people's community, through which we could exchange our knowledge, we could exchange our cultural knowledge, wisdom, and we could work together with other indigenous people's community, so which ultimately renews the values by adopting optimistic aspects of other cultures, and it also creates the strong, powerful, and effective voices for advocacy when we come together, work together. So moving forward, in the era of science and technology, we are totally dependent on the digital platform as well. So through the digital platform, we can work together. We can work for the cultural preservation and promotion of indigenous people. So through organizing webinars as like this, today we are here with the theme to with a motive to protect our culture and promote our culture and advocate for the rights of indigenous people. We have organized the webinar. So this could be the one example that we can organize webinars to promote and protect the culture of indigenous people. Likewise, cultural preservation websites. We can also work or create the cultural preservation website, archive the history, the literature, the language that we were handed by our ancestors, and that could be the documents for the upcoming generations, so that they could also look at their own culture and preserve them and work for them. And similarly, the social media campaign could be the one to protect and preserve our culture, to advocate for the rights of indigenous people. So for that we have also organized the August as a social August as Indigenous Peoples Month. So for this webinar is the third webinar under this social media campaign, and other could be the digital advocacy for rights. Digital advocacy include the webinars or the social media campaign, or speaking for others through our social media platforms, and talking or discussing about the importance of the indigenous people's right, indigenous people culture, and so on. So these are some of the examples that we could do in this digital platform, as well as eh, involving in regional and global platforms and interacting with other IP communities, including non-IP individuals or forums. So culture is the only heritage that Indigenous people possess. So let's raise our voices and work together for the cultural preservation. Thank you all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Benita. That was wonderful. It is important, as you said, the need to engage in multiple organizations at the regional and global level for the indigenous communities to raise their voice and make sure that the voice is heard by the international media or the global community, IP and non-IP alike. Thank you for that, Ms. Benita. We now move on to our next speaker. We have with us Mr. Horan Hansdag. He is a member of All India Catholic University Federation and also a assistant professor in Madhpur College, India. I would like to invite Mr. Horan Hansdag to talk about advocating for Indigenous people as a student activist. Over to you, Mr. Horan.
Thank you, Avijit. Thank you. Thank you so much. So good evening, everyone. I am very glad to be part of this international webinar and very thankful to the administrative teams who have thought of organizing this event because in today's world, at least we have to be very confirmed about the indigenous people and the indigenous rights, which I'm going to talk about. Advocating indigenous rights as a student movement, students activist, I would be sharing my own experiences also. Starting with today, because my topic is on the rights, indigenous rights. First of all, I would be discussing about the term and terms that used in Indian constitutions. That in the Indian constitution, this term tribal or Adivasi or indigenous is not used. And actually, it must, however, be stated that the Indian Constitution does not use the term Adivasi. What we are we are using indigenous, tribal, or Adivasis, but here instead refers the scheduled tribes as Anuschit Janjati in Hindi, traditionally Jana, was more popular term to prefer to the tribes in the Hindi heartland in India. So according to this, we came to know that that our identity, first of all, the term used, I would be discussing in context of Indian Indian thoughts, Indian mythology, that the term and conditions they have used in the Indian Constitution. So the rights, our rights in Indian Constitution, we have some rights. I would be discussing particular rights that has accepted the ideas of equality and justice both in the social and political fields. Accordingly, it abolishes any discrimination to any class of persons on the ground of religion, race, or place of birth. Now, the Indian Constitution specifically provided certain articles in the Constitution for the upliftment of tribals and also to protect them from the oppressions caused by the other people in the society. The protective rights granted by the Indian Constitution 1950 to the tribal people can be classified under the following heads. Number one, educational and cultural rights. which is Article 15, 4, 29, 46, and 350. Second is social rights. That is in Articles 23 and 24. And the third is economic rights. That is in Articles 244 and 275. And the fourth one is political rights. That is in Articles 161 and 243, 333, 334, and 371. And the next is in the fifth one, employment rights. Articles 15.4, 16.4, and 16.4a. And in addition to these rights, fifth and sixth schedule of the Indian Constitution completely deals with the tribal people. Theoretically, the government of India take a lot of initiatives for uh, protecting tribal culture, life, and rights. But in practice, some of these fails. Some activities fail as paper tiger category, and the rights of tribals in India are violated by others. So, as we were discussing about the rights that we have in Indian Constitution, now the problem here is that most of us Adivasis, we do not know our rights. And that is why I would be discussing, relating the things with my own experiences, because I belong to one of the, yes, the youngest, one of the youngest state called Jharkhand, which is almost filled with Adivasi communities. And I belong to Santhal community. However, the Adivasis of our country have always been a major factor in our national life and culture. Adivasi masses in post-colonial India are still backward in terms of social development. Many Adivasi communities are unable to access education, healthcare, education, and
Mr. Horan? I think Mr. Horan is facing some internet connectivity issues. We'll wait for 1 minute if it continues, if he's able to reestablish the connection. Oh, yeah, seeing as Mr. Horan is having some issues in his connection, we can move on to the next speaker. If we come back, we could give him some more time to articulate his points. So thank you for that. I now invite our next speaker, Ms. Chandra Tripura. She is a member of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact and also a member of the Asia Indigenous Youth Forum. I invite Ms. Chandra Tripura to talk on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Avijit. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, IMCS and the AIYP and BIYF for having me to this webinar celebrating Indigenous culture and advocating Indigenous people's rights in the digital era. We all are actually living in this digital era, and we are trying to advocate through the digital platforms. From my, if I share about my journey, how I entered with the advocacy, how I incorporated the advocacy work with the digital era. I would say that I was introduced way before, I realized that I am going to, do advocacy works for my community for indigenous issues. Long before I realized that I was introduced, or I actually started doing advocacy through helping in typing a publication work in my very early age of my childhood. I saw that my father returned to home with a giant computer. That was the first time I actually saw a huge desktop when I was in grade 3 or 4, maybe. So that was the first time I was introduced with the digital, digital with the computer desktop. So I was actually curious about the thing. Both me and my brother, we actually tried to jump on that, and we had no idea how to use that, how it can, how it functioned. But we were very curious about the desktop, and my my father, being a daughter of an activist, indigenous rights activist, and a traditional leader of indigenous communities in Chittagong Hill tracts. We both of my brother and I, we were actually growing up in such environment where we don't know the word or the meaning of advocacy, but we were actually in the environment from our childhood. So I was I started helping and started learning, started experimenting with that giant desktop in my grade 3, and I somehow explored that I can be a good writer, and I started writing poems. When I was in grade 4, I actually wrote a poem, but I actually took few lines of Tagore. I took the themes and his ideas. I tried to incorporate with my ideas as well. So that's how I started, writing poems. And then later in my grade 7, I actually wrote a full page that on the superstition of indigenous communities in Chittagong Hill tracts, and that was really I actually I think that was the turning point of thinking about indigenous people's issues seriously. But before that, being a Tripura indigenous, we have so many rituals that that is actually done through dances, songs, and different, through different cultural elements. So, but after that, actually, I started thinking more seriously about indigenous culture, about indigenous dances, songs, how these things are, functioning in our community, how we are protecting, and how we can use all these cultural elements for our, individual, organizational, and for the communities, actions. So that's how I actually started. But that time we actually, none of us actually, including our indigenous leaders, we were not talking more about the digital, the benefits of the digital, era and all. So, but somehow I was very curious to learn and proper utilize the digital, the gifts of the science, the gifts of the digital era. So that's how I started. And yes, this digital sphere, today in this webinar, we are actually talking about the digital era and the digital sphere. And I was actually so moved by our previous speakers, that how they are actually thinking about the digital thing, and how they are advocating in digital sphere. So advocating for this actually digital sphere is full of promise to me, to bring people all together, and to act as a prompt and inexpensive mobilizing tool for all the activists, and even if any individual or not who are not activists but still can be an advocate for their social causes in digital era. And it's really easy and the swift way to communicate with other peoples, to reach to more people with a community, this global community whom we never met actually physically. So talking about the indigenous movements, indigenous peoples, before this, a pandemic, coronavirus, and before the lockdown process we are having now in all over the world. Before that, we were not much, into this digital thing. Yes, of course, we were still using social medias like Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, and other things, and even Zoom, the media we are using for this webinar. We were not that there was Zoom even before this pandemic, but not everyone, not all organizations were actually using these things for their regular meetings, for their individual or organizational, or even the activists or indigenous activists, I would say. We were not actually much into these things, but now we are already used to with this whole process, and we are trying to cope with all these new things. And I think we are actually doing great. And even talking about this webinar today, this webinar is the third webinar, and the last webinar, I guess, in celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day 2021 from IMCS in collaboration with the IYF and the AIYP. So I think Indigenous peoples, particularly Indigenous youth, are really doing great. Are trying to properly utilize this digital era, the elements, the platforms of digital platforms, and but still, we cannot count all the individuals. I think it would be more it would be good that if we can organize more interactive sessions. Sometimes when I talk, and I was actually trying, I tried several times when Benita and other speakers were talking, I tried to keep my video on, but I don't see actually other delegates, participants, their video, their faces, because these things are really, sometimes it makes us whoever speaking, it makes really awful for us, because I personally feel that I'm talking to the mirror. I'm talking to myself only, there is no one. So but I think that it should be more interactive. It should be more because this whole thing is, I'm actually enjoying these things, but nothing too much or excessive things are not good for our mental, physical, and everything. And these digital things, this digital era, and the gift of the science has both both sides of both positive and negative impacts we have. Now it's up to you how we use actually how we use the gifts of science. Are we choosing to properly utilize these for our own benefits, social benefits, our organizational benefits in a positive way, or we are trying to do harm for others. We are trying to, take the negative impacts of the whole thing. So it's actually up to us how we are using. Now, talking about the indigenous, individuals, young individuals who are not activists, who are not actively engaged in any movements, how they are using the social media, how they are using these digital things. Because nowadays we all have, at least a smartphone, and we have computers, laptop, everything we have to communicate with each other. Even my friends or colleagues are living in different corner of the world. So now it's up to us actually. So I have a question to all the delegates here who are with us today in this webinar. You can just write in the chat box that how you are actually using the social media in a one sentence maybe, or maybe in few words that I use Facebook for this issue, for raising voice for my land rights. So I would give you, a few times, maybe 2 minutes or 3 minutes to write that. In between, I will be talking. And the second thing I always, I realized, and I have seen many indigenous individuals who are somehow frustrated about because most of indigenous young, all indigenous peoples, not just young, we are very frustrated due to our, because we live in the age, we live in different ages, and we have experienced, we are living actually in the age, we are experiencing different challenges, all kinds of challenges, because of our, marginality due to, geographical location, our language, our culture, our dress, our face, our color, and everything. And we don't actually get that much opportunities. We lack opportunities than the others who are not indigenous, who lives in the city areas, or who come from the good or rich families. So we cannot actually compare those who are coming from marginalized areas or communities, groups, with the others who are actually having all kinds of facilities very easily without any complications. Yeah. So now coming back to the point that how indigenous young individuals who are not activists or a part of any movement, how they are actually using the social media, or this how they are actually portraying themselves in this digital era. Now, most of indigenous, I see, it's my very personal opinion that I see most of indigenous young individuals, they express their angers, frustrations in the social media. Of course, it is your personal ID, your own, that's your personal ID. But when you actually post something, even if it's from your own personal account, if you don't keep it only me, it's actually for all. So it's not a personal thing anymore. It becomes it becomes a social thing for everyone. So everyone can see and everyone can react, and I can actually assume that, okay, that person is this type. So next time I will be talking to that person this way, or maybe I can just remove that person from my friend list. So most of indigenous youngs who are not that much concerned, even who, I actually saw so many indigenous young who are a part of the indigenous movements, but they still actually, I would say that they actually lack the knowledge to properly utilize the social media. They sometimes attack our own indigenous sisters. They attacked our own indigenous leaders before saying something or before writing something. They never think that what the persons I'm attacking or talking about will react, how he or she will react, or how their families will react, and what situation will those persons go through. So these things we have to actually think very thoroughly before writing or saying something, because we, all the young people, people of this era, are actually very quick in judging others. We are very quick in judging others. We want everything constantly, instantly, and whatever we think, we just pronounce it, we just say it in front of that person without even thinking that this single sentence or a single word can change our relationships, can change our can lead the conversation in a wrong way or a negative way. So we always have to think how we can properly utilize the social media, because I understand the anger that are coming from your identity crisis. Maybe from the those angers are from because I totally understand that we face different kind of challenges from our childhood. We saw many communal attacks in our own homeland, in our own within the communities, or outside the communities, or even those who live in the those who actually study or come for the study region or for the job purpose in the city areas, where you really see any indigenous sister or brothers or any relatives in the city areas. We face regularly, whenever we step out from our home, we face many challenges. We get bullied by the non-indigenous communities, by our own friends who are not indigenous, or even indigenous. I see many indigenous people, youths particularly, bullying their friends just because they don't know how to speak the state language well. For example, for Bangladeshi people, many indigenous youths who can speak well, very fluently, the national language Bangla, even they sometimes bully other indigenous youths, other indigenous peoples for their accents. This goes same with the other countries, Nepal, India, Malaysia, or even other countries. So we have to be very friendly and have to understand other person's situation, and have to actually work on their shoes, because before that we cannot actually judge that people, or just say anything that comes in my mind. So these things we have to remember while using social media, because we all have many accounts in different social medias, and we think that it's my own account, I can say or write anything I want. But no, yes, of course you can, but only to then that you are not harming or hurting other people's. So now, how you can actually properly utilize these digital platforms for social cause, for the indigenous rights issues. Number one, Binita and others already mentioned about the campaign. Campaign is, online campaign is something that is very, very effective. If we launch an campaign physically without using any digital platforms, we can launch that or continue that in just few areas. But social media, that allows us to reach to the wider community, to the global community. When we opened our social media accounts, we actually enter to the global village. We are sitting in our own room, but we are actually entering when we enter to our social media accounts. We are opening the door of the global village, and we are entering there. So we have to be concerned about others as well who are living in different corners. And if we can properly utilize the social media platforms, we can actually achieve. We can gather so many voices from different corners of this Mother Earth, of this entire global, for for our own social benefits, for the cause that we are running a campaign in social media. So that's why we have to actually learn, realize, understand that how we can actually use these social media platforms. And of course, again, I would say that I don't actually blame our indigenous brothers who who express their angers in the social platforms and attack our own indigenous sisters for different reasons. But still, you have to more understand our sisters' situation as well, because we cannot just blame a person, an individual. We have to understand what in what situations she has grown up, or she's going through, or they are going through, and the entire environment we have to study. And this digital era also changing, bringing change in our culture as well. I'm not sure how you are thinking, but it's truly affecting, changing actually in our culture, in our how, because culture, whenever we pronounce the word culture, we think that only dance, song, and musical things, or those things are only culture. But it's beyond that. It's beyond that. It's how we actually think, in how we actually perceive, how we react. It's about our way of life. And this digital era is also changing our way of life, how we are utilizing our time, how we are communicating with others, and how we are actually shaping ourselves. So this digital era is also sometimes it complements our way of life, our culture. Sometimes it can be it can distract, or it can destroy as well. So we have to be very careful. We have to be concerned about these things, that this digital era or these digital platforms, we have to be concerned that we will use these digital platforms for the benefits of our culture, to represent our culture, to showcase our cultural elements, or make a strong instrument to protect our culture and cultural things. And for indigenous peoples, land is the most important thing. Because I believe that it starts from the land, actually, our culture, everything. Because the props we are using in the dance, the elements or props we use to make our indigenous attire, or instruments, for example, flutes or different kinds of instruments, that actually come from the nature. And if we don't have our own indigenous people's specific land, the way we actually protect the land, the way actually we nurture the nature, the elements of the nature, if we don't have that set up, then we won't be able to protect our own distinct indigenous culture. Because when we start living in a scattered area, it is very easy to lose our culture. Because if I live in other indigenous, even in other indigenous community, or if I live in in America, for example, where there is no Tripura indigenous community, I may lose my language. I may forget how to speak my own mother tongue, Kakbara. So land is very important thing for indigenous communities. That's just one simple example, but there are more in-depth things about land and the importance of indigenous people's lands, and how we actually think about the land, and how our indigenous norms and values actually interlink with our indigenous land, our own territories. So these things are important, and we are actually constantly losing our indigenous lands, our own indigenous territories, because we have different kind of land management system, natural resource management systems. We have community forests, and in the name of development, our government and the corporate organization, developers, and the many powerful individuals are grabbing our lands. So now, again, coming back, how we can raise voice in the digital, using digital platforms for our land rights or cultural rights, to protect our cultural land, and even for our self-determination. So, we have many delegates from different countries in this webinar. So for example, if I start a campaign from here, from Bangladesh, I can easily reach to all of you, and you can actually be a part of that campaign very easily. It's inexpensive and free of cost, because we all are using our social medias. We have Wi-Fi at home now. We are, even if we are using mobile data, but still we are using for our own selves. So in the meantime, we can also be a part of something good, any kind of campaign or movement. So these social medias or digital platforms is actually bringing us very close to each other. We just need to learn how to use it in a proper way, to making a strong instruments for our for establishing our rights. So I would request all the delegates, all the young people who are listening to us, who are here with us today in this webinar, to learn proper utilizing the social medias and be friends with others. I know that we have some delegates as well in this webinar who are not indigenous, but let me tell you that indigenous issues, or the problems indigenous peoples are going through in their lives, is not just indigenous people's problems. It is a global problem. It is an international problem. It is a problem of other communities as well, who we know that as mainstream communities, it is their problem as well in their own respective countries. Because if anything happened to their land, to their, in their culture or anything, that can also, create impacts in the within the country, or starting from the country, it will actually impacts in global areas as well. Because if I shout from here now, if anything happened here of me or any of our colleagues, then our colleagues, friends from different parts of the world will also raise voice for us. So these things are happening. So not necessarily that to raise voice for indigenous issues that the person or an individual or any organization have to be an indigenous or indigenous-led organizations. This is a global problem, global issues. So we all have to be a part, both indigenous and non-indigenous have to be a part of the solution. And it will only be able to solve the problems if we all come together. If we both indigenous and non-indigenous come together. Because let me tell you from my experience, this is a vital truth to some people as well, that whenever we try to convince or tell or share about our situation to the mainstream community who are not indigenous, they barely listen to us. But when a non-indigenous person, particularly those well-known face or renowned people, when they share about us, when they talk on behalf of us, when they fight for us, that movement actually become movement for all. So it's more easy to reach to the mainstream community, because we also, this is a natural thing, I would say, and I don't actually blame in much to the mass people, because the media we have in all countries, I guess, it's just not, I'm pretty sure that it just not happen in Bangladesh, it also happen in other countries as well, that in media, in our governments or our textbooks, our national curriculum, there is no, there is barely, informations about indigenous peoples. And the informations we have in the textbook are media, the way media is talking about us, they are actually not the way we want. As our previous speakers, he was also mentioning that government wants to name us one way, but we indigenous communities want to be known as indigenous. And it's our rights. It's our rights that we want to be known as indigenous. No one can name us in different way. For example, we are being called as Upojati, Kudra small ethnic communities, blah, 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 which are actually like uprising words. So we all have to be united and gather strong voices all over the world and make this a strong common collective movement with the strong voices for all, not just only for indigenous rights issues, but for all global issues, global problems we are going through, we are facing now in this era. So I'm not gonna make it too much long, but yes, if we want, if we try, all the young people can bring change, because we are the change. If we want, we can actually bring change in the society. We can be the solution if we want. And this digital space has been seen as how to say that, and I see it an opportunity and that new doors for any individual or organizations concerned with social change. So let's enter, with a positive vibe to bring change in the society. As I mentioned earlier, that this digital platforms is the global village. So when we open the door, when we enter to that global village, let's enter with a positive vibe and with the determination, with the promise that we will bring change in this global village and be the change, be the solution for all, for Indigenous people's rights, for all the people's rights around the world, and be the solution. Thank you for hearing me, and thank you IMCS for organizing this amazing webinar series, and for partnering with the Asia Indigenous Youth Platform and Bangladesh Indigenous Youth Forum. I'm too much overwhelmed and very hopeful for the new Youth Commission within IMCS, and I look forward to have an amazing journey with the Youth Commission, and really honored for joining this webinar and listening to all the other speakers. And I would request to the organizers, especially IMCS and all the delegates, to have more interactive session. Let's use this digital era, in a proper way. Let's try to properly utilize this for, to establish our rights and to bring change in the society, and the positive change, of course, and be united. Long live youth solidarity, Indigenous people solidarity, and all the people's solidarities around the world. Thank you. Over to your visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chandra. That was wonderful. Hopefully, yes, we'll be able to create, using the digital platforms, a global village that is much more inclusive and that allows for the rights of the Indigenous communities and all other marginalized communities. I would also like to acknowledge the support that the AIPP and AIYP has been giving to the IMCS Asia Pacific, especially to the IMCS Youth Commission for Indigenous People. And we are very grateful to have your support with us, and we are very grateful to have engaged with the AIPP and AIYP, even Bangladesh Indigenous Youth Platform also. Thank you for that. I would again like to invite Mr. Horan to complete his session that was interrupted due to the internet connectivity issues. Over to you, Mr. Horan. Mr. Horan, you're on mute.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Horan.
Yes. So thank you so much once again. Good evening. As I was speaking about the rights, indigenous rights that we have, especially in India, and being the student activist in my past life, I have experienced about the indigenous feeling that we have, that first and foremost that we start this this indigenous rights what's called that we would know that how this indigenous rights, especially I use Adivasi in my area, especially in Chota Nagpur and Santhal Pargana. Santhal Parganas, we use Adivasi. So poverty is one of the major problems. Because of that, I think many Adivasis, many indigenous people are not able to go to school. And this is what today in this context, when we are talking about the digital era, in this digital era, the obstacles to learn through the digital platform, our Adivasis are lacking behind. Our indigenous people are lacking behind, because in the schools, in the colleges, so many indigenous students are there, and they do not afford to buy the mobiles. They do not afford to buy the computers. This is what we come to know in India, many parts of our India, that people live in the hilly area, in the forest area, and I was talking about actually about one of the primitive tribal. Uh, she is a girl, 16 years girl, Payal Birhor, who passed the first matriculation examination from Hajaribagh district. It is, uh, this is, uh, this must be where we must be feeling happy to listen about the result. But this has a great meaning to measure the educational condition of this primitive tribe, because this is the latest news that we get this month itself, 3rd August 2021, that this Birhor tribe, the 16-year-old girl named Payal Birhor, the daughter of Andno Birhor. Now, with this information, we also can see that what is a position in our uh, uh, in our in our education, because the traditional and cultural distinction of uh, each indigenous community has given us the unique identity. And with this, in the world platform, because recently we have celebrated the World Indigenous Day. On that day, uh, especially, we remember our own culture, our own heritage. This is actually a program to propagate the ideas, the culture, and especially the identity that we are having in this world. Yes, we have the creative mind, which can be seen in our daily activities, whether it is in the rural areas, whether it is in the urban areas. Although the life of this indigenous is not static, rather we have a dynamic view of life, which makes us adapt new ideas and adapt to new situation. We are scattered in different parts of India, and we form considerable number of the population in India. And therefore, and therefore, uh, we can see that how we can use these rights. In my in my in my experience, when I was in All India Catholic University Federation, and under that we have AYCM, Adivasi Yuva Chetna Manch. Through that, we used to work in the villages. We used to go to village and perform the dramas, the skit plays, through which we has to we have to uh, we have to aware the people, aware the indigenous people, and this is what needed even today.
Is Mr. Horan having issues again, or is it just me?
I think he had some issues.
Okay, cool. Let's see if he's still here. Sir, are you still here, Mr.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
please continue. Sorry.
Don't know what. Okay, so Santals are the largest community in Jharkhand, and I think all over India, because according to the record, we see that Santals are the largest community in India. Santal indigenous people. Now because I've used this this PPT, education is needed. And in this digital era, why it is needed? Because many of our people do not afford, as I said, that mobile, computers, and internet connection. And just now, I am also having problem with the internet connection. This is what the problem of the area also. And of course, this this problem is similar to every indigenous people of the forest areas, the village areas. And now being the youth, being the youth activist, and being the youth, what is our responsibility? The responsibility is to make them aware. And because I teach in the college, and where if the students are 100, only 45 or 50% students are having the internet connection and the mobile. And rest of them are still not having. This is the biggest problem among the tribals. Today, when we are in this platform, we have to remind ourselves that being for the indigenous people, what we can do. In my experiences, I remember I have gone to villages with Father Benji. We have done many workshops and seminars with Father Solomon. We have studied the matters of Adivasis, matters of indigenous people closely. And of course, as previous speakers said, that the culture is not only for dancing and singing, but we have the unique culture that is actually connected with our global what's called symbol of unity, where we can share our problems, where we can develop together. And today we need to have the development in the socio-economic areas. And the study is needed and the research is needed, because this month, in my previous webinar, I have been speaking about the global identity of indigenous people, where especially of Jharkhand Adivasis, they have done tremendous activities, and they have fought for their rights, especially Sido Murmu, Kanu Murmu, Chand Murmu, and Vaira Murmu in the Santhal movement, which took place in 1855. And this movement was not properly given the space in the history. And that is why, to preserve our culture, to preserve our identity, we need to have the education. And for the education, we need to improve our socio-economic areas, in our socio-economic areas where we can at least afford our studies, at least afford for the technologies that are used in modern era, in this era. At least our students must have joined the schools and colleges. And Dumka ICAP is doing tremendous work among the Adivasi people. The activities that we do has seen the changes among the tribals, because what we have seen before the lockdown, and after the lockdown, in between we have in India, the lockdown was over and the second wave came, and another lockdown began, where the study has seen that our Adivasis have not benefited the online education. And this is the question of our being the Adivasi, being the indigenous, from the indigenous community, that what we can do for our people and how we can develop in the field of education. This is actually in our Jharkhand. The education is the big question, big problem. And in this problem, what we can do is nothing but to aware our people, to make them aware of their being, give them the cultural practices through which they can even think of education, and being the youth, our responsibility is to think for our own people when we are going ahead in our future. Thank you. Thank you for this, because lots of problem occurs due to internet, and because of this, I think I'm muted, unmuted, and this is the problem of Adivasis. This is the problem of indigenous also. Sometimes our voices are muted, sometimes our voices are muted, and especially we are known for the unmuted. We are known for the muted people, and that is why to raise the voice, to come up with this problem, uh, to study this issue, we need to raise our voice, we need to fight for our rights, we need to develop, and we need to especially come or join in the mainstream development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horan. That was wonderful, sharing your experience with ICUF and as a professor, that experiences that you've had in the difficulties that you've faced in teaching and others also. Thank you for that, Mr. Horan. We would like to move on to a Q&A session, a question and answer session. If there is any participant who would like to address any of the delegates with a question, you are most welcome. If you want, you can raise your hand and go ahead. You can unmute yourself and direct the question to the delegate. Would everyone like to ask a query?
Come on, bring your questions or maybe any opinion.
Hello, am I
Yes.
audible?
Yes,
I'm Father
Francis
David,
David.
Francis David. Yeah. It's not a question, it's rather a suggestion or information. You see, we are talking about sufferings and the reason for coming together. In India, very recently, one of the Jesuit priests, Father Stan Swami, he had given his life for the indigenous people, the cause of the Chotanagpur tribals. I don't know whether any mention has been made about this in the beginning of the conference because I joined late. I would like Father Jesse Benjamin, the National ICUF advisor, to just to share something about this particular thing, what happened in India. If Father Jesse Benjamin is there present. I am Father Francis David from Dumka ICUF. I'm the state advisor. So if nobody is, or even Horan himself can say, Professor Horan himself can say something about Father Stan Swami and what happened in a nutshell. If nobody is there, I could also share, please.
Father, since we are going through a small time constraint, I would like to request we could do that for another program.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Father Francis Devraj.
Or maybe Abhijit, can I request Father Francis for if there is any details or written submission regarding the issue?
Well, in brief, I would say just for 2 minutes. It's actually, Father Stan Swami, he was standing for the rights of the tribals in Ranchi and North India. Okay. Now, what happened was that so many young tribals, they were labeled by as the Maoists, that means leftist, and they were put in jail. And Father Stan Swami took the cause of them. There are, evacuation of the people from their own land. So Father stood for the land issues of the people. And in fact, he filed a case against the government itself, state government. As a result, he was arrested as a Naxalite and he was put in jail and he died in the jail. It happened very recently. And therefore, I salute and I also invite the people who are joining this webinar today as indigenous. Would like to pay a salutation to Father Stan Swami. I just wanted this as an information. He is a martyr in India for the indigenous people. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Father Francis.
Thank you, Father. If
can I talk?
go ahead, William, please.
Thank you, Father Francis, for your information from IMCS International and Asia Pacific. We show our solidarity with ICAF when ICAF organized a program, and we gave a statement also. So this is for your kind information, Father. So IMCS always with Father Stan and ICAF. Thank you, Father.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Father Francis. Thank you, William. We are all aware of the issues that has been happening in India, especially the recent death, passing away of Father Stan Swami. If possible, if Father Francis is willing to share his documents that we could communicate with the other movements, we are more than happy to share that with the participants that have joined today. Thank you for that. We now move on to the last session. I would like to invite Mr. Suman Gale, a member of the Indigenous Youth Commission of IMCS, to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Suman.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Today I am here to express my sincere gratitude towards all the speakers, especially Mr. Chandra Tripura, youth representative in EC, AIPP, and a member of AIYP, and Mr. Horen Hanstok, assistant professor at Madhupur College and former member of All India Catholic University Federation, and our Miss Binita Tama, one of our member of IMCS Indigenous People's Youth Commission, and our Mr. Wilfrex, the president of Ateneo Lumad student organization, for giving us the voices for the indigenous rights. I also express my sincere gratitude towards William, then Abhijit, Robbie, and Angie for their constant support. And I am also thankful towards all the participants present today for standing with us. And I am also thankful towards Father David for sharing his words and being with us. And then it's my honor and it's a blessing for me to be with you all and working with you all. And let's always join our hands together for the welfare of the people, especially indigenous people who belong to indigenous community, because they need the support of ours, because they are suppressed, they are marginalized. So we need to keep our voices raised for the welfare of this indigenous community. So thank you everyone for being together with us tonight, and thank you and have a nice great time, all of you. Thank you.